Welcome back to our C Sharp beginner tutorial. Today, hopefully, this would be the last episode in the C Sharp beginner tutorials series. Today, what we're going to look at is random numbers and randomization. So, let me just bring up Notepad. What we're going to look at today is random numbers and randomization. Okay. Um, I think there's really not much to talk about. I'm pretty sure we all know what random numbers are. So, random numbers are numbers that you try to select randomly. Okay. So, you try to generate numbers randomly. And there are different types of random numbers. There are different types of numbers, as you saw in C sharp. There are floating point numbers, and there are integers. There are that's double precision numbers are more, how do I put it, they are more accurate than floating point numbers. Okay, so they take more decimal places, but for that it takes a, double the double data type occupies more space than the floats. Okay, so you could actually generate any type of random numbers, as we'll see when we head into Visual Studio. As for randomization, the reason we're combining random numbers and randomization is you would um, you would notice in some games, okay, some events that occur in some games are randomized. Okay, for example, let me give you a very simple example in a game where you encounter randomization is in Tetris. If you've played Tetris, um, in Tetris in Tetris, the blocks that fall from the sky where you try to arrange lines. If you notice, the first block that drops when you start a game, and the subsequent blocks that keep dropping, they are completely randomized. Okay, so for example, if you have something like a T block that falls at the beginning of the game, if you end that game and you start the game again, you'll notice that it's not that same T block that comes down as the first block. Okay, so the whole blocks that fall down from the sky as you play the game, they are all completely randomized. Okay, so the thing about randomization is you cannot do randomization without random number generation. Okay, and we'll see how how we try to achieve that. So how you move on from generating random numbers to completely randomizing some crazy event or some well-defined event. Okay, so just like in the game of cards, if you try to shuffle cards, what you're trying to do is you're trying to randomize the sequence of the cards. Okay, so we're going to see how you can use random numbers to shuffle cards, use random numbers. um well let I'm not sure we're going to have enough time to look at so many different things, but we will see how we can use random numbers to perform randomization. So let's go into Visual Studio now and see how we can generate random numbers. So I'm going to open up Visual Studio. For this final lesson, we're going to create a new project for it, console app. I'm going to call it randomization. Let's just call it randomization, and I'll put it inside our my apps folder. Create a new folder, call it randomization, and inside that folder we'll select that folder, and choose create. So our solution will be created by Visual Studio, same as our project, and there we have it. So this is our program class. So for this, there's already a random class, okay, in I believe it's in .NET. I'm not sure if it comes with C sharp. I don't think it comes with C sharp. Okay. There are ways, of course, as a programmer, you could write your own random class or write methods that generate your own random numbers. Okay. When we're not going to go into that, believe it or not, creating random numbers can be really challenging if you're not so good in programming. You might get confused in the kind of crazy. Well, I'd say I would even say it's more of a job of a mathematician than a programmer. Okay, to create a method that generates random numbers. Okay, so it's that difficult. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to use an already generated random class. So I believe, like I said, I believe it's in .NET. The team that built .NET, as we've seen earlier, there are a lot of classes which they've already written and provided with .NET. Same with the random class. I believe that it's provided, it's bundled together with .NET. So the class, I think the random class is in the system namespace. So since we already have using system, that should work right now. If I type random, you can see random there. Just to make sure it's in the system namespace, let's try system.random. If that works, yes, as you can see, the random class is in the system namespace. Okay, so so that is the class. So to use this class, you first have to create an object of the class. Okay, so it doesn't, if you write random dot, you'll notice that it doesn't have any useful static methods. Okay, the only static methods I can see there is equals and reference equals, which usually comes with every object. Okay, so you have to create an object. So most of the methods of the random class are instance methods. Okay, remember instance methods. They mean that for you to use those methods, you have to create an object of the class first, and then it is with the object that comes the methods. Okay, so first we're going to create an object of this random class. So I'm going to call it, you can call it whatever you want. That's the variable that's going to hold the object. For me, I'm just going to call it random with a small r, and then we're going to say equals and say new random. So this is us generating or creating an object of the random class. And it's worth noting here that the random constructor takes two overloads. Okay, there's the one that doesn't take any argument, as you've seen there. That's sorry, that's this first one. It takes no argument, and then if you click on the arrow here, you'll see the second one that takes a seed. It takes an integer argument, and it's called the seed of the random class. So far, I'm not really sure the use of this seed. I know if you read here, it will say that the seed is a number used to calculate a starting value for the pseudo-random number sequence. What's it's trying to say is that, you see, usually for a pseudo-random, like the random class here, does not really generate an actual random number. Okay, it's kind of a pseudo-random number, meaning a pseudo-random random number is just a number that it's kind of systematically generated. Okay, now because it is systematically generated, it is not actually randomly generated. Okay, so the use of the seed is to kind of well, should I say, in a way, it's to kind of get it closer to being a randomly generated number by scrambling the starting point of the generation. So what it means is like, if you generate, usually for pseudo-random numbers, if you tell a pseudo-random system to generate a random number for you, let's assume I say, okay, please generate a random number for me, and it goes 5. Okay, now for a real pseudo-random number, pseudo-random number generator, if you tell it that's not from where it has created the first random number, if you restart the program all over again and you ask it the same question, generate a random number for me, it's going to generate the same number that it generated earlier. Okay, it's going to generate 5 again. Okay, now that's why it's called a pseudo random number. However, if you keep on asking it to generate random numbers, the numbers are going to keep changing and it will look as if they are randomly generated. Okay, so you see that 5 which is generated as the first number, the use of this seed is to actually change that first number. Okay, so which means it's kind of scrambles even the first number, which means the sequence is also going to change. Okay, now for the random class in C sharp, I believe whether or not you provide a seed, I believe a seed is generated. Is a seed is automatically assigned to the random object. Okay, the reason is because you will see when we generate random numbers using this random class, using a random object as a random class, even if we generate it without a seed, you will see that the when we try to generate uh, another random number that's from beginning altogether, the sequence is going to change. So the first number we generate is not going to be the same number that gets generated, and the sequence of the numbers are going to change. Okay, so that's just that. So all this explanation I'm trying to tell you is that whether or not you provide a seed here, a seed is going to be automatically generated. That's what I believe, because that's what I have noticed with the C sharp random class. Okay, so we're just going to create a random object like this without providing the seed and put a semicolon there. So now this generates the random object and it stores it inside this random variable. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is, how do we generate? We've generated the object here. It's stored inside random. So now notice what happens if I type random dots. You can see now we have access to all the methods which come with the random class. Okay, so we have the next double, next bytes. Really, the real method you should really worry about, I think, it's, well, maybe two, just the next double and the next. Okay, the next double I believe generates a double type data type random number. Okay, and the next generates, I believe, an integer. Yeah, the next generates an integer. So sorry, let's start with the next method. Okay, so we're just going to tell it to generate a random number for us. As you can see, immediately I put the open normal bracket. It's showing me that the next random the next random the next has 3 overloads, and the first one takes 2 arguments, so the minimum value and the maximum value. So what that means is, if you're telling it to generate a random integer, and what this minimum value and maximum value are saying is that, okay, from where to where do you want your integer to be generated? That's from which cutoff point to which cutoff point. So if I say, for example, from the minimum value 5 and to the maximum value 10, it means it's only going to generate a random integer between 5 and 10. Okay, I believe 5 and 10 will be inclusive. We can check here. Mean value, the inclusive lower bound of the random number returned. So the minimum value is going to be included, but the maximum, they didn't say anything about the max value. So I believe the maximum value is not going to be included. So if I say between 5 and 10, the random integer that will be generated will be between 5 and 9 inclusive. Okay, so 10 is never going to be among the random numbers that will be generated. Okay, I hope that makes sense. That's what happens when you call this next and provide the minimum value and maximum value. We are going to test them out, so I'm just trying to give an overview. Okay, so let's click on the lower arrow and see the next overload. So the next overload takes just a maximum value. Okay, and notice what it's saying about the maximum value: the exclusive upper bound of the random number to be generated. Okay, max value must be greater than or equal to 0. Okay, so what it's saying is that when you try to use this max value, it has to be greater than 0. So most of these overload methods, they do not work with negative values. Okay, so all your random number generation should be between 0 and upwards. Okay, and also for this overload, you only provide a maximum value. Okay, so the minimum value is going to be 0. Okay, so if you provide 10 in here, it's going to be from 0 to 9. Okay, so 10 is never going to be inclusive among the random numbers that get generated. Let's click on the the bottom arrow and see the last overload. So this is the last overload where you just call int random.next, and notice what it does: returns a non-negative random integer. Now this overload does not look good to me at all. So the reason I don't like this overload is it has no bounds. Okay, there's no lower bound, there's no upper bound. Well, basically I believe it's going to be, the lower bound is going to be 0, but there is no upper bound. So I would not recommend you to use this overload. Okay, so I think the most useful, well, the two are equally good, I believe, because you can always convert this to the next one with some simple arithmetic. Okay, but for a beginner, I think this will be much more useful for you, the one that has a minimum value and maximum value. So if we want to generate a random number between let's say 5 and 10, and we want 5 and 10 to be inclusive, so what we're going to do, the lower bound we're going to set as 5, that's the main value, and then the upper bound has to be 11. Okay, remember the values we provide here have to be integers, so you can't put 5.4 or 10.3 in here. Okay, they have to be whole numbers. Okay, now because we want 10 to be inclusive, that is why we're writing 11 here. Okay, so if we provide 11 as the maximum value, then 11 is not going to be inclusive, but 10 will be inclusive in the random number that gets generated. So if we run this now, okay, it's going to generate a random number and it will return the random number. Okay, so what we need to do, we need to store this random number into some variable, or we need to display it. Okay, so rather than store it, I think let's just display the random number. Okay, so let's use console that will be I've forgotten how to write it. I think console is with capital C. It's a class. Console dot write line, and we just call this random. Remember we've already created the object, so we just call random dot next between 5 and 11. So this is going to generate a random number between 5 and 11, and it's going to be printed out on the console. So let's just run this and see what happens. Okay, I've clicked on play, and you can see the number that gets generated is 5. Okay, notice what happens if we run this program again. The next number that gets generated is 10. You can see what happens. Okay, if the seed was if there was really no seed, as we stop that application and run the application again, you would see that 5 would have been generated again. Okay, but because a seed is kind of even though we did not specify a seed is kind of included in there by default. So the sequence is always scrambled before a number is generated. Okay, so we can actually do this and ask it to do this. In fact, let's just copy this and paste it a couple of times. So 1, 2, and 3. So we have 4 times. We're telling it generate a random number, generate another random number, generate another random number, and generate another random number. All random numbers generated should be between 5 and 11. 5 and 5 should be inclusive, but 11 shouldn't be inclusive. Okay, remember the way this method works is that the last number is never included. So let's run this and see. So you can see the first one is 8, 6, 8, 6. Okay, I know people would be thinking there's probably no randomization here, but I can assure you there is randomization, and to make sure of that, I can prove that to you by, let's put this in a loop. So we're going to use a for loop for int k equals 0, k is less than. Now we're going to do it 100 times. We're going to repeat. We're going to generate 100 random numbers between 5 and 11. Okay, and then k plus plus. So we open up our loop, and the loop is going to be closed here. So we're going to type out the generated random numbers. Okay, now let's run this program and see what happens. So we expect to see 100 random numbers, and there we have it. If we scroll to the top, this is the first number. You can see 9, 8, 6, 6, 6. If you count this, there are, sorry about that, I accidentally closed the okay, I think it's closed. We'll have to run that again. So let's open it up, run it again, and you can see those are the numbers generated. So you can scroll down and see. You can see, by the way, 11 is never among the numbers because 11 is not included. Okay, so there are 100 numbers here, and they are all randomly generated, and the numbers are between 5 and 10. Okay, if you want the numbers to be between 0 and 80, you can just change that to 0 and 80, and you'd see that that works. By the way, 80 will not be included in the number of in the randomly generated numbers. Okay, so whatever number you provide as the upper bound is not going to be included. Okay, let's run that and see. You can see that's 100 numbers randomly generated between 0 and 80. Okay, so this is how you generate integers between 0 and 80. Good. This is all good and fine, but how do we convert this to randomization of events in our game or in our application? Okay, first I'm going to start with something very, very simple. I'm going to start with arrays. Okay, I'm going to start with strings. Okay, imagine um, if you have like some game or let's say some application for the change. Let's not a game. Okay, let's say we have some application for some application, and in that application we want some NPCs, that's non-playable characters, or I can't believe I'm still drifting back to a game. Okay, so let's assume we're making a game, okay? And there are some NPCs in our game, non-playable characters, and each non-playable character has to have a name, okay? A first name and a last name, okay? So what you want to do is you just want to randomly generate names, okay? You just want to randomly generate first name and last names for your NPCs. Suppose we have 100 NPCs and each NPC has to have a name. So we just want to quickly randomly generate names for them. What you can do is I'll show you how you can see in that sense a random number isn't really your goal, okay? Even though you are, as you're going to see, we're going to use random numbers to generate that, okay? So first let's assume let's say we have some names, okay? We have some real names. What you're going to do is you're going to gather your real names. You can take say 50 or 100 names, or well, as much as you can. You don't want it too much because that would mean you'll have to type a lot. Well, not really type. Well, you still have to even if you're going to feed it through some kind of file reader. You still have to prepare the file that has the list of names. So you have to type a lot. Okay. So I think let's create a names of, since we're this for an example, let's use 10 names, okay? Now, if you're going to do this for a real application or for a real game, I'll suggest you use 100 names, okay? So that would be somewhere about okay, and people are not going to recognize, or it wouldn't be easily recognized that you're just repeating a bunch of names, okay? So for this, since this is just an example, we're going to use 10 names, okay? So the names we're going to use first, I'm going to create an array. Remember our array, by the way, I'm going to create a list, okay? I'm going to create a list, which is a dynamic array, and I'm going to store 10 different names inside that list, okay? So let's go ahead and do that. So let's say list. Remember, oh, okay, we have to include our using system dot collections dot generic, because that's where the that's the namespace for the list data type. So I'm going to create a list of string, okay, because we're going to store names inside the list. So it's going to be a list of string, and I'm going to call it names is equal to new list. Remember this, I'm just initializing the array now, okay? So I have declared the array, I've initialized the array, the name of the array is names. Now I'm going to populate the array. I'm going to populate this list with some real names. Remember I said I'm going to just include 10 names, since this is just for demonstration's sake, okay? By the way, because it's a list, you can always add more names into it, okay? So names dot add. Remember, this is how you add elements into your array. I'm going to start with my first name, okay? I'm going to say names dot add. I'm going to add my last name, okay? So I'm just filling in some names in here. I'm going to fill in like 10 names dot add. Let's say John. By the way, I think it might be faster if I just copy and paste this and then change the Okay, so I think that should be over 10, but doesn't matter. We're just going to use that. John, let's use some, uh, let's see, Abu, Aladdin, Tom, Dave, Ali, Abdul. Let's use, I'm running out of names already. Uh, Solomon, Sani. Okay. All right. So we have over 10 names. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So what we have is we have 12 names. Okay. Now because we have 12 names, remember the indices for where these names are stored inside this array is going to be from index 0 to index 11. Okay, so I'm just going to note that this is index 0 is the minimum index and the maximum index is index 11. Okay, so that makes up 12 names. Okay, so now what we're going to do, remember what the whole point of this program, what we're trying to do is we want to create, we want to output, or we want to generate um, a first name and a last name. Okay, or we want to generate 10 randomly generated names. Okay, or maybe 100. I think we said 100. Okay, let's go ahead and do 100. Okay, so we're going to generate 100 randomly generated names, and to do that, notice what I'm going to do. I'm going to create a loop for int, and this loop is going to run 100 times. So I'm going to say if k equals 0, k is less than 100, and k plus plus. So it means this loop is going to run 100 times. Each time it runs, at the beginning k is 0, but as it keeps running, k keeps incrementing by 1. Okay, now what I would like to do is, as this k increases, or as the loop goes on, I would like to do this console dot write line. So I want to output the name, but what I want to do is I would say the first name. For the first name argument, what I'll do is I'll generate a random number. Okay, when I generate that random number, I'm going to use that random number to be between 0, which is the minimum index, and 11, meaning 11 inclusive. Okay, so in our parameter, it's going to be between 0 and 12, if you remember. Okay, so I'm going to generate that random number between 0 and 11 inclusive, and I'll use that random number, okay, to represent the index for these names. Okay, so what I would do is, after I generate that random number, I would say, okay, use that random number to pick out whatever name is stored inside that particular index in the names list, or in the names dynamic array. Okay, that's what I'm going to do, and that name is, I'm going to set it as the first name. Then I'll repeat the step again, and then that second name is going to represent the last name. Okay, so that is as simple as that. It's just a very simple and straightforward algorithm. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to say console.writeLine. So here we're going to remember we've already created our random object, so we're going to say random dot next. Now we're going to give it a minimum value is 0 and the maximum value is 12. Remember, it's going to be 12 is not going to be inclusive. Okay, so after generating this random number between 0 and 12. What I would want it to do is, notice what I'm doing. I'm going to pick names here, and I'll say the index. Remember the square brackets. That is what um, identifies that you're trying to pick an index. So whatever number you put in between these square brackets is the number that represents the index of this array that you're trying to access. Notice we're putting the random.next, this randomly generated number, in here. Okay, maybe this is probably a bit confusing. I should probably break it down. Okay, I think I should. So what I'll do is I'll say int first name index. I think this is more this will be more easily understood. Okay, so first name index, okay, is equal to, and then I generate the random number. Now I'll say random dot next, and I'll pick between 0 and 12. Okay, so after it generates a random number between 0 and 12, whatever number it picks, remember 12 is not included, whatever number it picks is going to take it and store that number into this first name index. Okay, we're going to repeat the step and say int last name index is equal to random dot next 0 12. Okay, so it's going to try to pick, it's going to generate another random number between 0 and 12. 12 is not inclusive, and it'll store that random number into last name index. Now notice what we're going to do when we try to type out the first name and the last name. We'll just pick that random number and say go to names array, go directly to whatever number this is. Okay, so we're going to say first name index here. Okay, so it should go and access whatever index that was generated here randomly. Okay, so it means it's going to pick any of these names randomly. Okay, and we're going to that's going to be the first name, and we're going to put, okay, I think it's probably better. Okay, I think this is fine. After typing this, we'll just use a plus, use a space, and then okay, let's just use the one we've been using before. So we're just going to use this this method of outputting variables. So I'm going to use that $sign symbol, and this is going to be in curly brackets. Remember, anything in curly brackets is going to be output as a variable, and then the space in between the first name and the last name, and then next we're going to have the last name. The last name is going to be also inside curly brackets, and we'll say names. So it should go to names and pick which index, the last name index, which was also randomly generated. I hope this is making sense. And now that is all for our program. Remember, everything in here is going to be repeated 100 times. So it's going to pick a first name and a last name randomly, print them out, and then go to move to the next step, pick another first name and last name randomly, print them out. That's how it's going to keep generating those random names. So we're going to see a first name, a last name, a first name, last name, first name, last name 100 times. Okay, and they are all randomly generated. The only thing is the names are going to be one of these names. So that's why I said if this was a real project, you should probably have more names here. Maybe 100 names would be sufficient. Okay, so let's run this and see. So if we run this, you can see it has randomly generated those names. I'm scrolling to the top where we have the first name. So you can see Jonah Abu was the first randomly generated name, then John Jonah, Mustafa Abu, Ali Aladdin, Mustafa Abdul, Abdul John, Dave Mus. You can see how well randomly generated these names are. I've hardly seen any name repeated twice here. I know there would be eventually, but it's almost unbelievably perfect. So you can imagine if the names you store inside the names list is up to 100 names. You can imagine how randomly generated they get to be, and I can assure you nobody is going to know you randomly generated those names. They would look perfectly reasonable names. Okay, so that's the end of this. I hope this gives you some idea of how to. I know I talked about randomly generating a card, like for example in a card game when you try to shuffle. I've done that before in a game which I'm currently working on, where I use random numbers to scramble. Actually, I did use random numbers to shuffle cards, but it just feels that like for me to show how to shuffle your cards, randomly shuffle cards, is going to take a lot of time because we have to first create the card class. There's so much to do before, probably even how we're going to output the result is going to be a lot of work, so it's going to take a lot of time. But what I would like to tell you is it's very, very simple. It's a very, very simple algorithm. Suppose you have these names in this way. Imagine these names were cards, okay? Imagine if you take a name from this index and take it to swap it with the name in this index. Okay, so just take a name in this index and swap it with a name in this index. Now imagine if this index you're picking the index randomly. The second index, you're also picking it randomly. So you pick an index randomly, pick a second index randomly, and then you swap the names in those index. Okay, that is going to be like you're swapping the cards in those positions. Okay, now imagine if you carry out that operation, like if you have 100 cards, if you do it 100 times, you have perfectly scrambled those cards. Okay, they're going to be well shuffled. Okay, you don't even have to do it 100 times. You could do a 50 if you have 100 cards. You just need to do it enough times, okay, depending on the number of cards you have. Okay, so that's just how simple the algorithm is. And not just cards, you can just about anything you can think of. Even the Tetris game we talked about, you could generate, imagine if the same thing, just put them in a list instead of having strings. Remember, a list can take objects, okay, like when we did a list of cars. Remember when we did a list of cars? So what you're going to do there is, instead of cars, what you're going to have there is probably blocks, and your block class is going to be the class that generates the objects, the block objects that fall, and each block is going to differ from the other block. Okay, so if you have the blocks, I think in Tetris there were probably just 5 different types of blocks. I believe 5. I'm not sure if it's more than 5. There's the square, there's the cross, there's the, okay, maybe there are more than 5, but they're not up to 10. They're not up to 10. Yeah, I don't think they are up to 10. Okay, so it's all about just having those items inside a list, and then you try to pick out the item based on the index. Okay, just generate a random number and use that number as the index, and just pick out the object that's inside that list randomly. Okay, So that's how you randomize events in games or whatever. Okay, so this, as I promised, this is the end of the C Sharp for Absolute Beginners series. And I'm not going to stop here. I'm going to go ahead and start a new tutorial. So the next tutorial we're going to look at, hopefully is going to look at, we're going to start seeing some graphics. So we're going to be looking at Windows Forms application. So I hope you stick with me in subsequent tutorials coming up, and I hope to see you in the next episode, or next, um, I believe, next lesson. Well, not lesson per se, but well, next episode. See ya.